Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. Before I get to this week's guest, I want to remind you to subscribe. And something I never mention is click the bell so that you will be alerted every time we have a new episode. This week's guest is Deacon Jim Arndt, who I met. I shouldn't say who I met. I now know him through Gordon Crow. Actually, one of my favorite testimonies. Go back and find it. In fact, I'll post the link again in the description of this video. Gordon said, "You got to reach out to Deacon Jim. He's got a story." And I just greatly appreciate any time. There's so many people that know others that have fantastic stories and so much humility involved. Just to say, I'm going to share it and I'm going to step out and I'm going to just share what God did for me. So, Deacon Jim, I want to thank you for being here and thank you for being willing to share the story. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly am happy to be here and glad to reach out. I'm a storyteller, so I like to tell my story. I've told it quite a few times in different settings. I don't think my story is all that spectacular, but it is, I think, more of a testament to the Holy Spirit and how incredibly the Lord can work in people who really have, for the most part of life, had no desire for God whatsoever. And a lot of my story has to do with the people that I've met. And I give thanksgiving to God for those people and for, even though they weren't evangelizers per se, they did a really good job of evangelizing me and bringing me closer to the Lord.
Excellent. So let's get into that. When you say you had no desire for God, how far back does that go? And if it's fitting, how did your childhood go?
Oh yeah, that's we'll go all the way back to there. So I was baptized as an infant, and I was baptized in my parents both were non-believers, non-religious. My dad I would classify as an atheist. He was a big believer in astrology and horoscopes and how the moons lined up in whatever quadrant of whatever. It was um, just kind of weird. My mom came from a very, very I would say hardcore Catholic family. My my mom's mom, my maternal grandmother, my mom would call her a Catholic Nazi in a sense. I mean, she was really, really intense. My mom had five brothers and sisters, five siblings, and my grandmother would make them all go to confession every single week before Mass. And my mom just kind of grew up saying, I'm not going to force that on my kids. I'm not going to make them do that. I'm going to allow them to discover God for themselves. But another part of that from my mother, more so than anything, is she just had a real hatred of God. She was really, really mad and upset with God. When my mom was 9 years old, her dad committed suicide in front of the whole entire family. I don't know what they were doing. They were either, I don't know if they had TV in 1959 or not, but they were either listening to the radio or watching TV as a family. And he got up and walked into the bedroom and came out with a shotgun and just shot everybody, all the kids. So there's a lot of mental illness on that side of my family. Even with my mom attempted suicide 2 or 3 times now. So she struggles with a lot of mental health issues. And so she was just very, very angry at God and really couldn't understand how a good and loving God would allow something like that to happen. So I pretty much grew up with zero faith whatsoever. There's no God. We didn't even go to Mass on Christmas and Easter. I only remember a few times going to church, and it was usually for a funeral or a wedding would be the extent. So that, and I, I used to make fun of my friends in elementary school and stuff that had to go to CCD on Wednesday nights, and I didn't have to. And so I was kind of a jerk about it, I guess, a little bit. But um, once I got into high school, I dated a girl who, very, very Christian girl. This was my junior year in high school. Very, very Christian girl who attended an Assembly of God church. She invited me to go, and I went. And it was just kind of a bizarre and surreal kind of experience for me. Um, there was a lot of singing, there was a lot of preaching, and then at the end, I don't know if it was an altar call or what they call it, but people would come up and they would talk about how God is influencing their lives or what's happening. And this one guy started walking down and up the aisle, and he just went down on the ground and started flopping around like a fish out of water. And I was like, "What in the world is going on here?" And the girl I was dating was like, "Oh, isn't that so beautiful? He's being engulfed by the Holy Spirit." And I'm like, "This is just really..." Now, again, I had no religious background whatsoever, so I had no idea. All I knew was that there was a guy looked like having a seizure in the middle of this church. Um, and so that really kind of just even turned me off more from religion. I just thought, man, that was just weird. And I could never see something like that happening in my life. Um, and so from there, I graduated high school. Sports was a big deal. I was a track athlete and a football player, and I ended up going on to college. I went to the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh, and I ran track for them for a couple of years until I got injured. But my freshman year at Oshkosh, I met a girl, and she would eventually become my wife. And she was, I like to say, kind of an odd duck. She went to mass every weekend. She was Catholic, raised in a Catholic family. She went to mass every weekend, no matter what. It didn't matter. And if she knew she was going out on Saturday night and have a hard time getting up on Sunday morning, she would go to the vigil mass on Saturday. And that was just kind of odd because everybody else I knew in college was so happy to not go to church because they were away from their parents. They weren't being forced to go. And so that was kind of the last thing. But she continued to go, and it wasn't necessarily so much that she was deeply evangelized, but more out of a fear of going to hell if she didn't go to mass. It was, an obligation for her. And we had talked a little bit, and she knew kind of my feelings toward religion, that I just thought it was kind of weird and whatever. But I felt like I was kind of open. And
Say
so
that again. You felt like you were what?
I felt like I could be possibly open. I
Oh,
mean,
oh.
I understood, why she was going to mass, and I was fine with that. And um, but we did it for probably 2 or 3 months. And I remember we were in the library on a Saturday, and we were doing homework, and it came to about 3 o'clock, and she was like, "Oh, I gotta go. I gotta go change and get ready for mass." And I don't know what happened, but I just blurted out, "Do you mind if I go with you to mass?" And I think there was a period of dead silence. Um, I think more she was trying I think she was more in shock and trying to like figure this out, but she was like, "Sure." So she went back to her room. I went back to my place and got changed and went to mass really for the first time ever. And the church that we went to was St. Peter's Catholic Church in Oshkosh. It was about 2 or 3 blocks off campus. So it was a little bit of a walk. The Newman Center on campus wasn't Catholic enough for her, but we made the hike, the 2 or 3 block walk to St. Peter's. And it was a 4 o'clock mass, and there was a lot of people there. And I remember I had no idea what was going on. I just didn't have a clue. There's a lot of standing and kneeling and sitting, and um, I don't know if there's incense at that mass or not, but there was something going on. Um, and I had a sense, I had a feeling. I had no idea what was going on, but I felt deep down inside that there was something happening here, that there was something, I don't know if importance the right word, but there was just a sense that, that there was just something. I was moved. And so I kind of joke when I tell the story, but I always kind of joke that as we were leaving mass, I kind of looked at my girlfriend and said, "Wow, that was really awesome. When do we get to do this again?" And she looked at me and kind of said, "We do this every weekend, you moron." So um, that's kind of the joke. So and again, I was really curious. I was really, because I'd never felt that moved before, especially when I went to the Assembly of God church and, or any kind of funeral, anything like that. I just never felt, I didn't feel anything. And here I actually felt something. And I felt, so it was kind of weird. So we would go to mass when college was in session. We were at Oshkosh, but I really didn't go to mass. She lived 2 hours north of Oshkosh and I lived 2 hours south of Oshkosh. So when college wasn't in session, I went back home and I didn't go to mass. I just didn't really think about it. When I'd go and visit her in the summer, we'd go to mass, but when she would come and visit me, we wouldn't go to mass. It was just kind of this thing. We dated all through college. My senior year, actually my junior year, or our junior year in college, the spring semester, I proposed to her and she said yes. And then in September of my senior year, went to mass and I grabbed the bulletin and I saw something in there about this thing called RCIA. And so I asked her, like, what is RCIA? She said, oh, that's how people become Catholic. And I was like, well, do you think that's something I should do? She was like, that's, totally up to you. I didn't know if it'd be right for me because I was baptized Catholic. So in a sense, I felt Catholic in a way, but I didn't know. And so I decided, okay, I'll do this. Part of me was also apprehensive because I was still like, they're not going to do like really weird things at this, like I wasn't quite sure what this was going to be all about. So I went to the first session and there was 15 other people there and it was run by a religious sister ran the RCI program. She had a candle on the table with the lights off and we had to go around and kind of share our feelings and things like that. And it was kind of like, I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to be something I'm going to enjoy at all. Um, but I got through that and my girlfriend had asked me, how was the session and how did RCI go? And I said, well, it was a little bit weird, but I think I'm going to try and stick it out and go the next time. So the RCIA class was on Tuesday nights. So that following Monday night, I was in my room and there was a knock on the door and I answered the door. And it was a guy from an organization called Campus Crusade for Christ. They're now called Cru now because I think Campus Crusade for Christ was offensive for some reason. But he came in and asked me, if he could talk to me for a little while about God and religion. And I said, sure. And the first question he asked me was, if you were to die today and stand before Jesus in heaven, and he were to ask you why should I let you in, what would you say? And of course, I said, well, because I'm a good person. I go to church. I do all these volunteer things. And he was like, wrong. You're not going to get in. Like, okay. So they started throwing Bible verses at me all over the place. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? And so he left. And then that Tuesday night, I'd go to RCIA and I'd tell the sister, well, I met this guy last night and he says that if we're good people, we're not going to go to heaven. And she's like, oh, let's talk about that. And so that talked about that. And then the next week, the Monday night, the guy showed up again. And I was trying to answer his thing from the previous Monday night, but he didn't want to hear it. And he was like, you Catholics worship Mary. I'm like, do Catholics worship Mary? And so I went back to the RCI class and told the religious sister that he says Catholics worship Mary. Well, let's talk about that. So basically these meetings continued, and the whole RCIA program became all about more of an apologetics standpoint of Catholicism, where this guy would come to me and say, scripture alone. I'd go back to the religious sister, and he said, we need to only believe in the Bible and nothing else. And she's like, no. So it was just really, really interesting to go through that process. Because for me, it felt really practical, because the questions that I had were being answered, and I knew what questions asked because this guy was helping me with questions all the time. But also it gave me a huge desire to read and know the Bible, because he honestly beat me up with the Bible, with verses, and I had no clue. So I did a little bit of work with them. I went to a couple of their Bible studies and a couple of their meetings and stuff. And it was nice. It was good to get a kind of a different perspective. But and I don't think this is true of Cru or Campus Crusade for Christ or anything, but they were really trying to convert me out of Catholicism pretty hard. And I could kind of see that, and it got uncomfortable. But I was also really, really looking forward to being confirmed, to being Catholic, to finishing the sacraments, getting First Communion and getting confirmed. And I guess I really had this kind of maybe more romantic version of what my life was going to be like after I was confirmed. I was firmly convinced in a way that, as soon as I got confirmed, the sky would turn pink, it would rain Skittles, flowers would be cotton candy. I just was really looking forward to just being totally a different person after being confirmed. So April 2nd, 1994, I was confirmed at the Easter Vigil, and felt nothing. Woke up the next morning on Easter, and I'm like, I'm the same person. I don't feel anything at all. And so I kind of, asked people, now that I'm Catholic, now that I'm confirmed Catholic, what do I do? It didn't specifically say it this way, but it fell under the realm of pray, pay, and obey, basically what it was. And I was like, wow, this was really just a complete letdown, and I just wasn't sure, how I felt about that. So it's just kind of got stuffed away. So I was confirmed on April 2nd, 1994. My wedding date was July 2nd, 1994. So once I was confirmed, the whole wedding thing kind of took over, and we were married here at St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church in Mary. Actually, it was St. Robert's at the time, but it's St. Francis Xavier now. And then on August 2nd, 1994, we moved to Northern Illinois. So I went to graduate school at Northern Illinois University. I went there. I was an assistant hall director, and I was there for training for about 3 or 4 weeks before school actually started. And it was there that I met a Southern Baptist minister who was the residence hall director of a hall next to the one that I was the assistant at. So he really wasn't my boss, but we went through training together and became really good friends. He was a Southern Baptist minister from Kentucky. He had a great accent and was really the typical Southern Baptist fire and brimstone minister that you think of. And I couldn't help but laugh. Every time he talked, I would just laugh because he just had this Southern Baptist preacher voice. That was so awesome. But I didn't know he was a Southern Baptist minister at the time. We were friends and going through training and talking about things. And after I was confirmed, I would wear this wooden cross necklace, and I was kind of bored on the outside. And I can remember it was August 22nd, 1994. He asked me about it. He said, "You have that wooden cross on there." He said, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, "Well, I'm Catholic." And he said, "I didn't ask you what religion you were. I asked you if you were Catholic." And I knew what the answer was, but I just kind of said, don't really know what that means. He said, well, tell you what, after training today, you come by my apartment and I want to talk to you and show you some things. I'm thinking about starting up a Bible study and just want to get your opinion on things. And I said, sure. And so went back to his apartment that night and he presented the gospel. He presented the kerygma to me in a way that I'd never heard or probably even had the possibility of hearing anyways. Um, but he laid the gospel out for me, what it meant to be in a relationship with Jesus Christ, what it meant to pray, what the purpose of church was. I think I got to his apartment at 8 o'clock at night, and I don't think I left until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And part of that was at the end was we prayed together at the end, and he prayed, and I prayed that Jesus Christ would enter into my heart, that I would be moved by the Holy Spirit, and that Jesus would be the center of my life from that point on. And that was a really, really powerful moment. And I kind of view it as a reconfirmation of my confirmation. I feel like ideally that's what should have happened at my confirmation, but I either didn't realize that or understand that or know that. But this conversation that I had with him was that sky turning pink moment for me. It was from that point on that Christ became the center of my life, and I was praying every day, and it was just a truly wonderful moment. So from there, we decided he had asked me if I would help him start some Bible studies on campus at Northern Illinois, and it was me, 5 other graduate students, and him. So there were 7 of us, and the other 5 graduate students were all Protestant denominations. I think 4 of them are actually Protestant ministers now. But we got involved with the Navigator series of Bible studies, and we actually started a campus organization called Students for Christ. And at the time, in order to be recognized as a campus organization, you had to have 99 members or more. And within 2 to 3 months, we had over 150 freshmen and sophomores involved in small group Bible studies. It was really incredible. And so I was Bible studying groups with 25 kids in it, 10, 15.
Where were you going to church at this point?
So I think it was St. Mary's in DeKalb. So my wife and I were going to church every Sunday. So we did that. So the Catholic thing remained. When we decided to start this group called Students for Christ, I was pretty clear that this wasn't going to be anti-Catholic, that, I didn't want an anti-Catholic, bias towards any of this. And the Southern Baptist minister, I think might be more Catholic than some Catholics that I know, because he was very interested in going to Mass with us. He didn't believe that the Eucharist was Jesus, but he said if it was Jesus, he said that's, I want to be part of that. So he was really, really good, and we're still friends even to this day now. But so I was involved in doing these Bible studies to the extent that so we do Bible studies, and then we do kind of one-on-one discipleship with these kids. So every couple of weeks, I was meeting with this group of kids one-on-one, and I just love talking about Jesus. This Southern Baptist minister taught me how to present the kerygma to college kids. Taught me how to evangelize, have conversations, and I just loved doing it. I loved having conversations even to the extent that I would, look at my watch and be like 3:15. I'm like, oh, my graduate level statistics course started 15 minutes ago. I guess I'm not going. So I started missing classes quite regularly, and it became clear to me that the path that I should be going down is more towards ministry than At the time, what I was studying was quantitative economics.
Fun.
Oh, yes, a lot of math. I had visions of being a college professor, so I didn't know what else I wanted to do with my life. But in having these conversations with these students, I'm like, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. If is there a way I can make money doing this? Um, so my wife's family also they own a bowling alley in where her hometown is Merrill, Wisconsin. So they owned a bowling alley called Blessington Lincoln Lanes in Merrill. And it was always assumed that her brother was going to take it over. Her brother was a couple of years, 3 years younger than she was. But at this point, her brother had decided that he didn't want anything to do with the business anymore. So her parents called us and asked if we would be willing to back up to Merrill for a year to help them run the business. They had a bunch of managers who had quit at that point, and they were unsure about the future. And so they just asked. And my wife had always really wanted to run the business. But like I said, it was just assumed that her brother would take it over. And so I just remember kind of being at a crossroads at that point. And it was really the first decision that I feel like I really, really prayed about, that I really, really sat down and was just like, Lord, I don't know what to do. I've got this wonderful ministry that I'm doing in Northern Illinois that I absolutely love. But at the same time, my wife's family needs help up in Merrill, and they would mean going up there and running the bowling alley and the business up there. I really, Lord, I need to know what to do. I need your help. And um, through the course of praying that out, it became clear to me that God wanted me to go to Merrill, which sounds really, really strange. And the Southern Baptist minister is like, really? Are you sure? We've got all this stuff going on down here. It's bearing a ton of fruit, and you think God wants you to go up there? And I said, yeah, I really truly feel it. And so at the end of that school year, we packed up our stuff and moved up to Merrill. And this was now 1995, and started to run her parents' bowling alley. And after a year of doing that, we decided to buy her parents out slowly. And at the same time, her brother decided he wanted to get back into the business. So it was her brother, me and my wife, and my wife's parents running this business that had been in the family since 1968. It was a really good business, very well known in Merrill and a respected place. So at this point, we were married, starting to have kids. Um, really tried to get involved in the Catholic Church here in Merrill, and really couldn't make any inroads. The idea of evangelization was not something on the radar. Um, I think for most Catholics, but particularly this parish in particular, evangelization just wasn't a thing. Um, and so, really, the only involvement I could get into was lecturing. All great.
You cut out right there. Say that again. What was that?
So it was hard for me to get involved because really the only opportunities for involvement in the Catholic Church was being a lector or a reader or a Eucharistic minister, and all those are great ministries, and God bless those that volunteer and do it. But part of me was like, I was in Bible studies for these large groups of kids, and I was out there talking to people about God and Jesus, and so it became really, really difficult, and I kind of felt myself drifting away from the church and actually looking more towards the fundamentalist side, the sola scriptura base of Christianity. I started to believe that the Bible was it, and it was actually my brother-in-law who um, we had numerous conversations, and my brother-in-law is very, 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 very Catholic. He's Latin Mass Catholic, and he's got 8 kids. Amazingly Catholic family. But we had some pretty deep conversations about where I was at, and I just remember constantly harping on the fact that the Bible is God's word. It's all about the Bible. I just remember him one time looking at me going, "Where do you think the Bible came from?" And I'm like, I couldn't answer that question. And so I came to realize that the Bible is a Catholic book. It came from the Catholic Church, and that kind of snapped me out of that whole mode. And it was at that point that I got really, really aggressive trying to get involved here at St. Francis, like Bible studies. And so I started making some inroads there. So at this point, I'm married. I have well, let's go to 1997. I'm married. My daughter, I firstborn daughter, comes along in 1997. We went to mass fairly regularly, pretty much every Sunday. But when we'd go down and visit my parents, which was a 4-hour drive south of where we were, we never, because my parents just were so anti-God, we just didn't go to mass when we came down here. Even though there was a Catholic church less than a mile away from where I grew up, I had never stepped foot in it. But when my daughter Haley was born in 1997, my wife and I kind of made a commitment to each other that we were going to go to mass. We were going to make mass a priority, and we would not miss mass for any reason whatsoever. No matter where we were, no matter what, we would go. So I remember we were down visiting my parents, and it was Sunday morning, and decided to go to this church that was less than a mile from where I grew up. Like I said, I never stepped foot in it before, and so we went to this church. Mass starts, music's playing, we're all standing. I look over the aisle and I see two priests walking down. So I kind of look at my wife and I'm like, "Why are there two priests?" And she's like, "That's a deacon." And as soon as she said that, I heard a voice as clear as can be, as clear as you and I are talking, say, "Pay attention to this guy." And so I looked behind me, and there were people behind me, but they were far enough away that if they had said something, my wife would have heard it with the music going and everything. So I'm kind of looking around, and my wife is looking at me weird, like, what's the matter? Like, and she was like, making, "No, what are you talking about?" So I had that, so paid attention to him. But every time we would come back up to Merrill, I would just kind of forget about that whole thing. And we would visit my parents maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year. But every time we went to mass at this church, this deacon was there. And every time I had this sense that I need to pay attention to this guy. And but again, I would come back up to Merrill and be like, we didn't have deacons in our church, so I had no idea what that meant or whatever. And um, so about 2000, my second daughter Caitlin was born. Again, we were doing this, coming down to mass a couple times a year, still having the sense of paying attention to this guy and trying to figure out what that means, but at the same time being totally oblivious when I was back in Merrill. 2005, my dad dies. He died of cancer of the sinus, of all things, and it was a horrible, horrible, painful experience that he went through before he passed away, and it took him a whole year to pass away. Because cancer of the sinus doesn't really kill you. It's not until it gets to the brain or the heart or the lungs or whatever it kills. So he suffered a lot. He did, on his deathbed, make a profession of faith to God. There was a chaplain at this hospice facility that he was at, and she would meet with him quite regularly, quite often. I would stop in and I didn't have much to offer, just whatever. But I would converse with this hospital chaplain, and she would have conversations with him. And I remember her calling and saying that he uh, confessed or made a profession that Jesus Christ was his Lord and Savior. And that was um, a pretty good thing. I felt really good about that. And a couple months later, after he had passed, I had a dream. And in that dream, um, I could feel my dad talking to me. And he said, Jim, I'm all right, but you cannot believe how beautiful heaven is. And from that moment on, I felt uh, really good about his passing and where he was at. Um, but during that time frame after he had passed, I spent a couple weeks with my mom, kind of sorting through things. And my mom had a really rough time with his passing. My dad did everything. My mom pumped her gas, did the grocery shopping, cooked all the meals. I mean, my mom was just really, really lost without him. So I kind of helped put things in order, and I started going to this church every day. And I remember going one day, they had confession. It was, I think, on a Wednesday morning or something. I went there for confession, and I was there, and this deacon that I keep seeing happened to be at the church at that time. And I kind of told him what had happened, that, I don't know anything about deacons. I come to mass here. I see you there. I hear voices in my head, of all things, telling me that I need to pay attention to you. What do you do? What do I need to pay attention to? And um, he started telling me what he does, and all that kind of stuff that deacons do. And in my mind, I'm going, that's not me. I can't serve people. I can't serve the church. I have a hard enough time taking care of myself. How am I going to, do all of this stuff? And I'm like, this just really isn't for me. But at the same time, this deacon had said that he literally was crying by the end of our conversation, because he had said that he was thinking about leaving being a deacon, that's even possible. He said he was so burnt out, and he was so that it was a thankless job, and that he felt like he was just not making any traction whatsoever in anything that he was doing with regard to that. And I said, well, believe it or not, you're having an impact on me. And he said it's exactly, he needed to hear that. And it was just a really emotional moment with this whole conversation that I was having with him. And um, it was amazing. It's amazing how God can put people in places at the right time, at the right moment, when people need to hear the right things. Um, so after that, mom was taken care of, headed back up to Merrill. I remember um, we went to mass on a Sunday morning, and we sit basically the opposite corner from the sacristy here at St. Francis, is where we always sat. And I remember at this point, this whole deacon thing was weighing pretty heavily on me after this conversation and all that's going on. And I just remember before mass kneeling down and just saying, okay, Lord, this isn't for me. You've got the wrong guy. I don't think I can do this. If you want me to do this, you need to give me some kind of sign. You need to help me figure this out. And so I'm praying there, and I look up, and out of the sacristy walks a guy in a white alb that I've never seen before. He walks from the altar, comes down the aisle, walking towards the back of church. Mind you, there's probably 150 people that he's walked past at this point. He gets to the pew that my wife and I and my kids are sitting in, and we're sitting in the middle of the pew, so he has to climb over 2 or 3 people to get to us. And he says, hi, my name is Deacon John, and I'm new here. I'm going to be a deacon here now, and I just felt I needed to say hi to you. So we had this kind of little bit of a conversation, and so he goes to the back, and I just kind of, go, Great, Lord. You have a great sense of humor. Way to go. So went home that night, told my wife what had happened, and she was like, okay, so you think you're being called to be a deacon. That's great. Why? If you could wait till the kids grow up, and we've got, we're running a business right now. We've got 3 young kids. Can you just wait? And I said, sure, but I really wasn't settled with that. And so then, time is passing. This was in 2005, and now in about 2008, so about 3 years have passed now. Kevin O'Brien, you had him on here as well. He was involved with the Men of Christ in Milwaukee.
Kevin?
And yeah, and I wanted to take a group of guys down to the Men of Christ conference in Milwaukee. And so our priest at the time, Father Jim, I asked if I could just make an announcement after Mass about it, see if anybody wanted to go, and he agreed. And so I got up at the ambo at the end of Mass, and I made this kind of short homily, which was about 5 minutes long, about the Men of Christ conference, and then went to the back of church so people could ask me questions or whatever. And about 3 or 4 people came up and said, "Have you ever thought about being a deacon? You speak very well, and you did a good job with that announcement." And my wife is standing right next to me, so she's hearing all of this that's going on. So I'm kind of like, yeah, I didn't tell anybody that I was considering it or anything. It's just kind of weird that these people were coming up, and just kind of like, yeah, no, that's not for me or whatever. And so everybody leaves, and my wife and I walk out to the car and sit down, and we both and she's like, yeah, maybe you should start looking into this and seeing what you need to do to apply for it. And I was like, yeah, I think we probably should. We have a Eucharistic Adoration Chapel here that opened in 2008. And I can remember a couple days after that Mass, just going in front of the Blessed Sacrament and being like, okay, Lord, this is it? I'm going to take the plunge. I'm going to try this out and see what happens. And I don't know what your plan is for me, but I'm going to do whatever it is you want me to do, and I'll do it. So I applied, went through the formation program, and entered the formation program in 2009 and was ordained in 2014. So it took 5 years. Mind you, I'm still running a business, a bowling alley, 3 kids, wife. Life is pretty hectic. I'm going through formation. And a couple things happened at the bowling alley that really made me question like what I was really doing with my life at that point, as far as the bowling alley aspect of it goes. One situation happened in 2005, shortly after my dad had passed away. There was a group of 3 young people. 2 of them were 20 and one was 21. They were in the bar. They had fake IDs. They got in. They got drunk. They drove and ended up crashing their cars. One car rollover, but they were rolling over. They were doing 90 miles per hour on a 55 highway. So they flipped their car over a few times, and the guy that was 21 in the car was not wearing a seatbelt when this happened. The 2 20-year-olds were. So this 21-year-old ended up getting airlifted to the trauma center in Marshfield, and he was in a coma for, I want to say, 6 months. He was in a coma, and they didn't think he was going to make it, but it created a large. It was just hard because this kid was really, really wrecked. This situation happened. Our liability insurance company wasn't going to cover any of the accident because they wouldn't cover us because it was 2 underage people involved in this. They found fake IDs in the wreckage of the car, but they couldn't like specifically say they used them at the bar, So it was a long legal battle, and it was just really, really messy and really, really hard and really, really frustrating. And so that was a significant point where I started thinking to myself, every time I served a drink, it was like, what is this going to happen? Or what's going to happen? What, you know, and so it just became, and we had video gambling machines there as well. And so I'm seeing these people who, I'm sure have gambling addictions, and how am I being Jesus to them, profiting off of what they're doing? So it's really, really a hard struggle for me. And um, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was in 2017. I was at the bar. It was a Sunday night, bartending. This guy just got done bowling, and he came into the bar, and him and I were talking. It was getting pretty late at night. Um, just having a regular conversation. He was having a couple drinks, and we were talking. He went home that night and committed suicide, and that was pretty much. I'm like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And so I had talked to the pastor here at the time was Father Chris, and he was helping me kind of work through that a little bit. But at the same time, it was I was involved in running a confirmation program here, doing some adult faith formation programs, doing some Bible studies. But I really, really wanted to get involved in evangelization, and that still really wasn't a thing. I really wanted to get back to doing that. I felt like I was doing God's work. I was being helpful. Whereas the bowling alley thing just wasn't that. And I don't, the bowling alley was great. God called me to do that, to have that part of my life. And I learned a lot, and I reflect a lot on my time working there. But life evolves, life changes, and you've got to make choices and decisions. And started to, after talking to my brother-in-law Mark and my wife and my father and mother-in-law, just kind of said, I want to back out of this. I want to work at the bowling alley less, and I want to do more stuff for the church. And Father Chris hired me kind of on a part-time basis. I was kind of splitting time between the bowling alley and the church, getting involved in doing various things, and trying hard to evangelize in a way, and bring that into the scene here in the Catholic Church. Um, and then and the bishop approached me in 2000, and I think it was December. It was December of 2019. The bishop approached me and said that he wanted to move Father Chris from here to a different Catholic church up in Rhineland, which is about 45 minutes away from here. And he said he was wondering if I would be a parish life coordinator here. And I said, I don't really know what a parish life coordinator is. What does that mean? And he said, well, you'd be responsible for the pastoral, financial, administrative business or whatever of the life of the church and the school here. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a big undertaking. And he said, I would give you a sacramental minister. There's a priest from India that was coming into the diocese. He said he didn't think he could be a pastor, but he would, put him here to do the sacrament, say mass. He wouldn't have any administrative responsibilities or anything like that. It would all fall on me. Pray about it and think about it and let him know. And so it took about 3 days. I talked to my wife. I talked to my in-laws. Just said, Bishop has asked me to do this. I'm seriously considering it. I would like to do it. I love this church. I love this parish. I love the Catholic faith. I said, I feel like this is where the Lord might want me to be. And they were very supportive. They said, sure, I'll go for it. And, right. So in March of 2020, my middle daughter, Caitlin, was diagnosed with anorexia. And that anorexia diagnosis came on the exact same day that I received a letter from the bishop stating that I was going to be appointed parish life coordinator on July 1st of 2020. And I thought, oh boy, the devil's at work already. And then COVID hit like 3 or 4 days later, COVID hit. shut everything down. And so I started here as Parish Life Coordinator on July 1st of 2020. In the midst of COVID, we've started running some evangelization programs here that have been incredibly successful. The church here is really, our focus here now is really on evangelization and missionary discipleship. That's just become huge here. We're just seeing great fruit, and I'm just so thankful to God for the people that He's put into my life, the opportunities that He's given me, and the chance to be able to serve God's people here at St. Francis and St. John the Baptist Church. It's just been truly great. So that's pretty much it. I talk a lot. I didn't give you much room to say anything, Eddie, but
I wanted to hear it all. I really appreciate it. It's funny, all the people that you mention, so they helped you on the way. That's what I really appreciate. Like, regardless of their background, that's what some people miss. How all of this can work together. People zero in on certain details and they're like, why didn't someone say something at this point? Or it's like, this is what happened. And I think, all of that was purposeful. And the other thing is, I think you mentioned several souls that the audience and I want to pray for. Unbelievable. The people tied to the bowling alley, family members. There's a lot to pray for. But what I wanted to ask you, in the diaconate, how rewarding is that? So you talked to that gentleman that said it was a thankless job. And I don't definitely understand that people go through those periods, or, in general, they just feel like that for years on end. How has that been for you, just the deacon role?
gosh, I think a lot of it is asking yourself the question, why are you doing what you're doing? I'm not doing this. I didn't become a deacon because I was looking for any kind of accolades or looking for people to thank me or whatever. I'm doing this out of love of Jesus. This happens to be a great means for me to reach out to people, to have a lot of contact with people, have a lot of contact with the parishioners, and do that. So I actually find this incredibly rewarding. I am very, very prayerful. My relationship with Jesus is very, very deep. And so I really believe that Jesus has put me in this position for a reason. I don't know the reason, but I'm definitely here for a reason. The parishioners here are so incredibly supportive of me. It's kind of a weird model that we have here with this parish life coordinator model, and a sacramental minister, to say mass and hear confessions. And in some places, that doesn't work very well. They struggle with that. Here, they've just been so incredibly supportive of what I'm doing here, and we have clarity on mission of what our purpose is. I'm abundantly transparent on, why we do what we do, and it's just been really great. And my family's been incredibly supportive. My wife has been incredibly supportive. My in-laws have all been incredibly supportive. The bowling community in Merrill has been supportive. They recognize what I'm doing, and it's it's been great. I tell people I don't feel like I have a job, because I pretty much come in, make do what I do, and it's just part of who I am now. It doesn't feel like a job, because this is really who I am and what I do, and I look forward to, for a long time it was hard to get up in the morning to go work at the bowling alley, so I just have the motivation to do it. I have no problem getting up in the morning and coming here, talking to people and sharing Jesus with people.
The other question I had was related to the Bible study. How important was that? I'm sure you've looked back at that time. I would assume quite often. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you can speak to the importance of that period of time.
Back in Northern Illinois, or when I was doing that.
Northern Illinois, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was it was pretty neat. We were doing the Navigator series of Bible studies. We would meet on Sunday night in my apartment, and the Navigator series is really really good. In fact, there's an organization called Evangelical Catholic that actually kind of took their material and made it Catholic, and it's really really good material to get people into what it means to be in a personal relationship with Jesus, how to have a prayer life, um, the purpose of church. Very, very what I like to call surface. But I always feel like the deeper you go in your relationship with Jesus, you will eventually wind up in the Catholic Church. There's just such a depth to the Catholic Church with its tradition and um, saints and everything that I think a lot of Protestants, and especially the fundamentalists, just don't get. They don't see that. And so I'm really, really happy with that Bible study group because it really gave me the discipline and the foundation to really have that relationship with Jesus, but also to spend anywhere from an hour to 2 hours a day in prayer. I pray an hour in the morning and I pray an hour in the evening. And it really helped me to be disciplined in doing that. And that group of guys was just a fantastic group of guys. I mean, I have no doubt that they're off being great Protestant ministers somewhere, wherever they are. The idea always was the idea that the Southern Baptist minister had was that the five of us would get our degrees at Northern Illinois, and then we would go to other colleges and then start Student for Christ organizations there.
Sure.
So a couple of guys in the group, one of them I think went to Ball State after Northern Illinois. He started the Students for Christ there. Another one I think went to Western Kentucky or somewhere, and the Southern Baptist minister that started this whole thing is actually at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. So the idea was that I would be the one that was going to stay at Northern Illinois for the long term and keep Students for Christ going there. So that kind of screwed up the plan a little bit.
A little bit, yep.
And I don't even know if Students for Christ is a thing at Northern Illinois anymore. I know they still have Students for Christ Oregon chapters or whatever at different universities throughout the country.
Yeah.
I get their newsletter still. Stay kind of in touch with that. They have a prayer list that they send out, so I read that and pick things off the prayer list to help them.
The last thing I think is God's grace that prompted you to ask your girlfriend at the time to, hey, well, how'd you say it? Like, can I go?
Is it all right if I go with you to mass?
That's such a huge grace. There are people that would go a lifetime without asking that question, and especially considering your background. It's funny how that just kicked everything off, and
it was totally impulsive. I mean, I was totally not thinking. The words honestly just came right out without thinking, without whatever. They just, and there it was. And I just remember throwing those words out there and seeing the look on her face and just kind of going, I don't know if I just said the right thing. And I guess the other question was, what did I just say? What just happened here? But that was and I don't know. She's a great Catholic woman. I mean, my wife is fantastic. She's so instrumental in my faith journey. Just even like through colleges, navigating the whole entire Catholic faith. She was, the Southern Baptist minister was an important part in my reversion back to the faith. or actually, I don't even know what you want to call that. I mean, it was my confirmation, my reconfirmation, my confirmation, really. Um, but leading up to that point, she was really, really instrumental in guiding me in faith. And she will tell you that she didn't really do that intentionally. She just was just being her. And I think that's something that people freak out so much about the word evangelization, and it's not really that. We evangelize in so many ways that we don't even realize just by being who we are. Um, she would have had no idea that she would have, she had no idea that she would bring me into the Catholic faith. Basically, that was never on her radar, but it just happened. Um, it's just amazing the way God works through people. But yeah, that was just a kind of just an odd moment. I just, like I said, I wasn't thinking. I just said it, and it was the feeling from mass. It's so hard to put into words. I think later on, because of the real presence of Jesus in the Catholic Church, there might be a connection there. There probably is a connection there, but um, I, I was just so incredibly moved that first mass that I went to, that um, it was just like this. There's something here. This is something worth. This is really, really worth it. This is worth coming back to.
Amazing. Yeah, that pay attention to this guy. That's remarkable. That's gonna stay with me. That is such a cool part. Not to mention the other, I think it was Deacon Jim that came up to you, or Deacon John?
Deacon John,
Come on.
Deacon John
Two
Ramazzini.
moments. I mean, come on. That could
Yeah,
not be more clear. And what's fascinating is when you said you had heard that, pay attention to this guy, then you eventually ask him, like, what do you do? What am I supposed to pay attention to? And I think we overlook, I can't speak for everyone. It appears that we do forget just what the importance of the deacons at the parishes. So, and I've interviewed a number of deacons and greatly appreciate their service and their heart for the Lord and His church. So, I want to just say that here on record. Really appreciate the fact that you do that, and there are so many throughout the world that do that. It's absolutely crucial.
yeah. There's a lot of great deacons out there. There's a lot of great deacons in our diocese. I mean, it's a wonderful community. It's a wonderful brotherhood to belong to. You're just, it's so great to be around good Christian Catholic men, that know their faith, and are willing to sacrifice, their time, sacrifice their talent, sacrifice things that they could be doing with their family, to really serve the church. And I think for, oftentimes for the average parishioner, they see what deacons do at mass and tend to think that's it, and kind of get this notion of being a glorified server in a sense. But my before I became parish life coordinator here, my thing was always, you know, the work of a deacon is outside of the church. It's what happens in the prisons. It's what happens at the nursing homes. What happens at the hospitals. And a lot of average parishioners just don't see that. They don't see the work that deacons do at the, visiting the homebound and bringing communion to people in the hospital, and things like that. And really, I think the important work that the deacon does is not what they do at mass, although that's incredibly important. I think it's what they do outside of the walls of the church that are really significant. Um, my role here is a little bit different now that I'm administrating and running the parish. Um, I don't get out into that's not true. I do get to get out in nursing homes and things like that, but it's a little bit different now than it was when I was doing that before I became parish life coordinator here. But it's really, important work. These the homebound, when they receive Jesus, it's a beautiful thing. I always enjoy that opportunity to get out and visit parishioners in the nursing home, in the hospitals, and assisted living facilities, and things like that.
Yeah. Well, anything else you wanna add, Deacon Jim?
No, I talk too much, so I probably should talk. I should probably stop talking now, or we might be here for another hour.
I want to thank you. Thank you for every aspect of that. It's really, really helpful, really edifying. So, everyone, please share and like and subscribe and all of that. And until next time, take care and God bless.